The fists came before any words did. Juwan was 14 years old and standing in the upstairs hallway of his aunt's house when his cousins caught him. His grandfather had been buried 5 days before. The adults were still downstairs, sorting through the old man's things, dividing the furniture into what each family wanted and what could be sold, and what they were pretending to be sad about. His cousins had found him alone near the stairs, in the narrow stretch of corridor where a single overhead bulb made everything look the color of old teeth. 3 of them, all older. They hit him the way people deliver a verdict, not wildly, not with panic, but with the deliberateness of those who have already decided what the outcome will be. His lips split against his own teeth. A punch below the eye made the hallway tilt. He slid down the wall until the carpet was close to his face, rough wool against his cheek, and he could smell the dust pressed into it. They told him what he was. He was cursed, they said. His mother had died in that car crash because of him. His father, too. And now his grandfather was gone, quietly, in his sleep. And if Juwan needed the pattern shown to him, there it was. Death moved with him. It lived in him. Anyone who let themselves care for him would find out what that cost. He did not argue. He lay on the carpet and pressed himself flat against the wall and let it end. Eventually it ended. They walked back downstairs, and he heard their voices drop back into something almost casual. He waited until the bathroom door was locked. He ran the cold tap so nobody would hear. That was when the cousins were done with him. The words were not done with him for much longer than that. He grew tall. By the time he finished secondary school, his body had settled into something that solved one kind of problem and created several others. He filled doorways. He stood just under 2 meters and was broad through the chest and shoulders in a way that made strangers recalculate before they stepped close. On the subway in the mornings, he watched people shift away from him without deciding to, pulled by some instinct that filed him under possible hazard. At a convenience store once, the clerk watched his hands instead of his face the entire time he was at the counter. He paid, took his items, left. He understood. He had come to understand that he simply occupied too much space, and most people preferred their space to remain predictable. He found work at a logistics company after university, the kind that runs around the clock and cares about whether numbers match at shift's end rather than who is doing the counting. He worked nights when nights were available. He worked weekends. The money was modest and steady, and he had decided to value steadiness above everything else. Back around the time he stopped having strong opinions about what his life was supposed to become. The apartment had 1 chair. He had bought it used. At some point, a few years prior, he had brought home a 2nd chair, during a window, when he had thought things might go differently for him. The 2nd chair was back at the used furniture shop now, returned without ceremony. The remaining chair sat in front of a television that he positioned carefully so it would face him when he ate, and which he left on at night because silence at that particular volume was too complete to sleep inside. He told himself he was fine with it. During the daytime, he mostly believed that. December arrived on a Wednesday that year, at least the company dinner did. He went. Not going would have required an explanation. His colleagues talked and laughed and pulled up photographs on their phones. Children in winter coats, small faces, mittened hands. A man from the dispatch division showed a video of his daughter learning to ride a bicycle without stabilizers, wobbling along a narrow path, correcting, going. 3 other people gathered around to watch. Juwan looked too. The girl made it to the hedge at the end of the path and braked, then turned around with both hands raised. He ate his meal, drank 1 beer, said the right things at the right moments, and took the subway home at 11. The car was nearly empty. He sat by the window and watched the tunnel walls slide past and let his mind go quiet the way it sometimes could late at night. He was not thinking about anything particular. He was not thinking about the chair or the television. He was not thinking about the cousins. He was just watching the dark. The old man sat down across from him. There were at least 30 empty seats in the car. The man chose the spot directly facing Juwan, settled into it with the ease of someone resuming, rather than beginning, and looked at him. He wore a full Father Christmas costume, seriously done, the red coat properly fitted, white beard reaching his chest, boots with actual buckles. A leather bag rested between his feet and made a gentle clinking when he shifted. His eyes were the kind that hold attention without effort. Juwan looked back. He was too tired to perform surprise. The man asked him what he actually wanted, not the version he would give if the question came up casually. Not the managed answer, the one you shape to avoid sounding too needy. The real thing underneath, the man said. He was specific about the distinction. The train felt quieter than it should. The other passengers at the far end of the car seemed further away, the overhead lights softer, as though the space they occupied had quietly separated itself from the rest of the city moving around it. Juwan looked at the man in the red coat and felt something steady and odd in his chest, the way a compass needle steadies when it finds north. He wanted a family, Juwan said. He said it plainly, without building up to it. A wife. A daughter. He said it and felt the particular embarrassment of someone who has confessed to wanting something too ordinary to be dignified, too specific to be safe. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, a slow movement, the kind that comes from someone who has heard the exact right answer. Juwan's eyelids grew heavy. He tried to hold them open. The hum of the rails deepened beneath him, slowed, shifted in pitch. He caught a word or two more from the man, something about a cost, something about what came next, but the words dissolved before they formed meaning, and then the tunnel went completely dark, and the dark was warm and total, and stayed. He woke up in the back of a wooden cart. The smell arrived first. Damp earth, animal sweat, wood smoke, and underneath all of it, something cooler, like stone left beside a river. Then sound, hooves on a hard-packed road, cart joints creaking, voices somewhere ahead in a language he had never heard. Then the weight at his wrists. He sat up. The motion was harder than expected. He looked down and found a rope, rough hemp, binding his wrists together and threaded through an iron ring fixed to the floor planking. His ankles were bound the same way. Around him in the cart sat 6 or 7 other people, none looking at each other. Their faces were turned inward, or downward, or simply blank, with something that had moved past shock into a quieter place. He looked out past them, through the open back of the cart. The road behind them curved into a forest. The leaves on the trees were the color of old copper, deep red-brown, nothing like any autumn he had seen at home. The sky above the tree line was a shade of blue he had never encountered in any city or any photograph, clear and enormous and unsoftened by light pollution, and across it more stars than he could process, arranged in patterns no planetarium had ever shown him. He tested the rope. It held. He tested it methodically, checking each direction of pull. It held each time. A soldier on horseback came alongside the cart, armored in a way that matched no history Juwan had studied, plates and leather, and a short sword at his hip. The soldier spoke, and the sounds were foreign. And then something shifted in Juwan's mind, the way a key turns in a lock it was made for. The understanding arrived without his consent. He had been purchased, the soldier said. He was property under a contract that was already sealed. Struggling would be logged, and would result in a situation worse than the current one, which was already decided. Water at the next stop. Stay still. The soldier rode forward. Juwan looked at the copper-leaved trees. He pressed his fists against his knees and breathed through his nose, and held very still. The blood contract came 3 days later, at the first settlement where the caravan halted long enough to complete paperwork. A different soldier came with a scrap of paper and a small knife. The paper was old in a way Juwan could not easily describe. Not brittle, not discolored, just worn by whatever had moved through it over the years. The soldier made a small cut on his own palm and pressed the blood to the page. The paper turned blue at the contact. Not a glow exactly, more like it had been waiting to become that color, and the blood had shown it the way. A heat bloomed at the base of Juwan's neck. He reached up. His fingers found a collar he could not account for. Smooth metal, warm in a way no metal gets warm, sitting at his throat as though it had always been there. He pulled at it with 2 fingers, then with both hands. It did not shift. He gripped it hard enough that his fingers ached and it gave nothing. The soldier wrapped his cut hand and walked away. The page went into a satchel. The transaction was complete. The caravan moved south. Juwan counted 8 mornings before he lost count. He was fed twice a day. A ladle of grain paste, thick and warm in the mornings and cold by evening, alongside dried meat that had been preserved past the point where it remembered what it had been. He ate everything. His body burned through the rations faster than the smaller people around him, and the hunger was a constant low pressure in his ribs, not sharp, just always present. Background noise he learned to stop noticing. He watched the other slaves when the guards allowed it. A woman in her mid-20s who kept her eyes on her hands had been sold for her husband's debt to a merchant. Two older men, with the posture of people who had finished being surprised, had been sold for reasons they did not share. A boy who looked younger than he was, small and angular, had been given up by a family that could not feed everyone through the winter. People talked at night, in low voices, when the guards had been still long enough. Buyers came at each settlement. At the third stop, a merchant from the southern lowlands walked the line looking for workers with traceable histories. He came to Juwan, looked at him, and moved on. Too foreign. No history he could verify. A farming estate sent a representative at the fourth stop. He assessed arms and hands, and turned back before he reached the end of the line. A cloth merchant, a minor lordship steward who wrote things in a ledger, a workshop owner, from a town that smelled of iron. Each one came, assessed, passed on. Juwan understood what he looked like to them. Too large for careful work, too foreign for trust. No history this world could place or check. Every buyer had a specific shape they were looking for. He did not fit any of them. At the fifth stop, the boy was purchased by a household with children. The wife looked at him with something that was not quite certainty, but was at least not indifference, which was better than nothing. He walked away without looking back. At the sixth stop, both older men were bought together by a quarry operation further up the road. 3 more stops, and only Juwan remained. The village arrived at the end of a road that seemed to have been heading nowhere in particular. Small, old, settled into itself the way places do when they have stopped expecting to become something different. Stone buildings with dark wood doors. A square with a well in the center and a market stand that had seen better decades. Children near the well who stopped and stared when the cart rolled in. A goat tied to a post. Chickens navigating the mud. The village chief came out himself to look at what was left. He was a compact man, not tall, carrying the particular self-assurance of someone who had not been required to compete for importance in a long time. He walked to the cart and stopped in front of Juwan. He did not hurry through what he was assessing. He stood in the mud and looked with the expression of a man working through a problem that has multiple steps. Nobody else arrived to bid. The chief bought him. Juwan did not know why. He would not understand why for some time. That evening he was walked to a storage room behind the chief's house, a square space with a packed dirt floor and 4 grain sacks pushed against one wall. A blanket was placed in his hands. He was told his hours and his tasks. The door was left unlocked, which he understood was not generosity but confidence. The collar did not require a locked door. He sat on the grain sacks with the blanket across his knees and looked at the low ceiling. Somewhere across a distance, he had no word for. In an apartment he would never return to, a television was still running. He worked. For 6 weeks he was the village's large, silent, endlessly useful foreigner. He hauled firewood. He repaired fence sections that had been leaning since the previous winter. He was sent to help wherever his size made a difference, and withdrawn when his presence made people uncomfortable. He ate what he was given, and slept on the dirt floor, and stopped noticing it, the same way you stop noticing a persistent noise. He learned the village the way you learn a route you walk every day. The baker's wife who came to her door at noon and scanned the square looking for something she had not found in years. The blacksmith whose hammer rhythm changed from morning to afternoon in a way that told you about his moods without his knowing it. The children who were loud near the well and quiet near the chief's house. The collar was warm at his neck all the time. He stopped reaching for it. On Earth, he had been invisible for being too large, too quiet, too present, in spaces that seemed to belong to everyone except him. Here he was invisible for being property. From the inside, both kinds of invisible felt essentially the same, which was a thought he did not enjoy having. Some nights he sat in the storage room and thought about the cousins, the hallway, the carpet smell. He had carried those words across a world, and they had arrived intact, without losing anything. He was beginning to wonder if they had known something he still did not. One evening near the end of autumn, when the cold coming under the storage room door was sharp enough that his breath showed, he walked out to the road. He was not escaping. He had nowhere to escape to. He went to the edge of the village, where the track continued into the dark between the trees, and he sat on a low stone marker and put his face in his hands. He had made a wish. He had said it out loud, to a man in a red coat on a subway car, and he had meant it from the deepest part of himself. A wife, a daughter. That was all he had asked for. Something ordinary. Something other people had by accident. and had never needed to ask for it all. What he had received was chains, a collar, a dirt floor, grain paste twice a day, a village that did not know his name. He had no way to know what he carried inside himself, the things that lived there quiet and unlit, the things every buyer had walked past without the ability to see. He had no way to know that the old man on the train had not given him a family and then failed to deliver it. He had only given him the road to one. He was still sitting on the stone marker, hands over his face, when he heard footsteps coming up the road behind him. The person stepping up the road was a woman. She was not tall and not old, though she was somewhere in that middle territory where hardship makes an age difficult to read. She wore a rough cloth wrap around her shoulders and carried something in one hand. She stopped a few paces from the stone marker when she saw him sitting there. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she held out her hand. In it was a piece of bread, torn unevenly from a loaf, the corner piece that is always slightly harder than the rest and slightly more dense. She said something. His mind was still sorting through the language, and he could not catch all of it at first. But the word she used was not a command, and not a question about why he was sitting at the edge of the village in the dark. It was closer to an offering, the same word you use when you pass something to someone who has not eaten. He took the bread. He ate it right there, both of them standing in the road, and she waited. He could not remember the last time someone had stood and waited for him to finish eating. Not as a transaction, not as the patience of a supervisor, just waited, the way you wait for someone who needed a minute. She sat down on the other side of the stone marker. She did not try to fill the silence. She let it be there, and it was a different kind of silence from the one he had been sitting inside before she arrived. Her name was Lizzie. He learned that later, in pieces, as the language settled more securely in his mind. What he learned about her, he learned the same way, gradually, in the way people share things when they have found that the other person is not going to run from what they hear. She had been sold at 16 by her father, not during a famine, not out of desperation that required complex justification. For the price of a clear debt and a good rabbit skin, she said it the way you state a fact about weather, flatly, without theater, and the flatness itself told him what rehearsing a thing for years does to how you eventually say it. Her first husband had been a man in a village a long way south. He had considered her useful rather than valuable, which is a distinction that makes all the difference in a life. He had died of a fever 3 winters back. She had not mourned him, and she said that without apology. The child was not her blood. A girl, perhaps 5 years old, whose birth father had died before she was old enough to remember him, and whose mother had never given her a name. Lizzie had taken her in. She provided scraps when there were scraps, warmth when there was warmth, and she was not proud of how thin that provision had been. She had come to this village 6 months ago, a widow without land and without prospects, with a child who was not technically hers. He sat and listened and said nothing. There was not much he could have said. What he had was a storage room and a collar, and a family on another world who had beaten him for surviving his own parents. He ate the last of the corner bread. The stars above the trees were still too many, still the wrong arrangement. He was becoming slowly angrier at the old man in the red coat. The morning after, the village chief summoned them both. He explained the situation with the brisk efficiency of a man informing rather than consulting. The mountain to the north was territory under his jurisdiction, part of a noble's land. Maintaining access to its resources and keeping watch over the border required a keeper, someone who lived on the mountain, managed the approach, reported back. It was not a desirable posting. The previous family had left. He had decided Juwan would fill the role. He had also decided, in the same breath, that a man alone on a mountain was impractical, and that Lizzie and the girl would accompany him as household. He used the word marriage, which carried contractual weight in this world regardless of how much either party had been consulted. Lizzie looked at the floor. She did not look at Juwan. Juwan looked at the chief. He had not missed the logic underneath. He was too large to place in town without unsettling the existing arrangements, too foreign for any structure that required established trust, and cheapest to house if another territory's keeper budget absorbed him. The chief was solving several problems at once, and calling it practical, which it was, just not in the way he was presenting it. There was something else in the way the chief looked at him, a particular attention that Juwan could not yet name. He filed it away. He thought about the stone marker, the bread, the silence of someone sitting beside him, instead of steering around him. He did not argue. The cabin on the mountain had been stripped, not ransacked, nothing dramatic, just progressively emptied over time, by the family who had lived there, and by whoever had come through after. The walls held. The fireplace drew correctly. The floor was sound. Beyond that, what they had was a structure and a view of the valley that nobody had been asking for. No bedding, no cooking pots, one wooden chair with a cracked leg that would not take weight, a bracket still bolted into the back wall, where a shelf had been, the board gone. Leaves had come in under the door and gathered in the corners over what looked like most of a season. The girl stood in the center of the main room and looked around with the expression children get when they are deciding whether to cry about something. She decided against it. She sat down on the floor exactly where she stood, crossed her legs, and waited to see what the adults intended to do. Lizzie went back outside to look at what they had to work with. Juwan crouched down to something closer to the girl's eye level. She watched him do it without moving away. She was not shy, he had understood that already. She was cataloging, he asked, working through the words carefully, whether she was hungry. She nodded. He went out to find Lizzie. The first weeks were difficult in the specific way of people thrown together without ceremony and asked to build an ordinary life out of essentially nothing. They worked at it. A wool blanket arrived from a woman in the village below who owed Lizzie a favor, 2 clay pots from a passing peddler, a sleeping mat, then a second, then a third. Juwan's size made him useful for hauling water from the stream further down the slope and for gathering firewood at a rate that surprised Lizzie the first time she watched him do it. Within 2 weeks they had something functional, if not comfortable. The language settled further each day, the way sediment clears from water when it stops being stirred. He could hold a conversation by the end of the second week. Imperfect, gapped, but enough. Lizzie corrected his wrong words without unkindness. The girl found his mistakes amusing and would repeat them back to him with the satisfaction of a child who has discovered something reliably entertaining. He noticed she never used anyone's name. She responded to Lizzie's voice and to instructions, but she had no name of her own to respond to because no one had thought to give her one. He thought about that for a few days. On a night when the fire was going well and they had all eaten enough, Lizzie was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. She had been like that all day, moving carefully, washing a cup twice without noticing, her eyes landing on things and not quite seeing them. After the girl fell asleep on her mat, Lizzie sat beside the fire and put her face in her hands. She made no sound. She simply sat that way, shoulders very still, the posture of someone who has been holding themselves together through a long day and has finally run out of day to hold through. Juwan sat nearby. He had no practiced response for this. He had no history with being the person in the room when someone else's grief needed company rather than answers. He watched the fire and let her be there. After a while, he set his hand over hers, not pressing, not pulling, just setting it there. She did not move away. Neither of them said anything. They stayed that way until the fire burned low and he got up to add more wood, and when he sat back down, she had straightened up and was looking at the coals with dry eyes, whatever it had been having passed through her and settled somewhere further down. He thought about the television he used to leave on so the apartment would have something to fill it. He was not going to need that anymore. He named the girl on a morning when they had nothing particular to do, which was still rare enough that he noticed it. He had been thinking about it for several days. He could have given her an ordinary name in this world's language, something plain and appropriate. Names here sounded like weather or small animals or tools, and they fit into daily conversation without friction. But every time he reached for one, it slipped away from him, wrong in some way he could not explain. He kept coming back to a book he had read as a child, one of the few things from those years he remembered with genuine warmth. A story about a girl who was carried by a storm to a place that made no sense and had to find her way home through it anyway. He had read it enough times that the spine had cracked. He asked the girl to sit with him. She sat. She had learned that when he used that particular tone, something was going to be explained. He told her, carefully, that a name belonged to her and no one could take it away. He wanted to make sure she understood it was not a label or an instruction. It was a thing that was hers. He said there was a girl in a story from his world, a girl who landed somewhere strange and unexpected, who was stubborn and brave and who found, at the end of it, exactly where she was supposed to be. He wanted to give her that name, if she would take it. Dorothy, he said. The girl said it back. Dorothy. She turned it over in her mouth, tried the syllables from a different angle, checked how it sounded. Then she looked at him and said it once more, with a word attached at the end. Not his name as Lizzie used it. A different word. One that meant something else entirely. He went completely still. His throat closed in a way he did not know what to do with. He turned to look at the fire so neither of them would have to manage his expression. He pressed 2 fingers hard against his knee and breathed, and told himself he was fine, and did not believe it. Lizzie, across the room, was suddenly very busy examining the clay pot for cracks. Things eased after that, the way a weight shifts when you finally name what you have been carrying. He and Lizzie were not in love, not yet, not in the way of stories that skip the middle. They were 2 people broken in different directions who had come to occupy the same cabin, and what grew between them was slower than love and built on different material. She mended a tear along the shoulder of his coat one evening, without being asked, and without mentioning it. He made sure the path from the cabin door to the stream was clear of ice each morning before she went down it. She laughed at something he said one evening, genuinely, the kind of laugh that surprises the person laughing, and the sound of it caught them both off guard. One night, when Dorothy was deeply asleep, and the mountain outside was quiet with cold, they were sitting at the fire, talking about something practical, the second clay pot, whether it was cracked too far to use. And then they were not talking, and she was looking at him, and the distance between them was not much. He kissed her slowly, leaving time for her to decide against it. She did not decide against it. It was not a grand moment, no dramatic weight to the air, nothing building. Just 2 people on a mountainside who had survived a great deal and were discovering what it felt like to be close to someone without tensing for the cost. Dorothy, the next morning, ate her breakfast with great concentration and said nothing at all, which told him she had noticed everything. The mountain taught him its rhythms the way all large things teach you, by letting you make mistakes and survive them. He learned that the weather moved in from the northwest and that he could read 2 hours of warning into the clouds if he knew where to look. He learned the deer moved along a specific ridgeline in the early morning and were gone by the time the light was full. The stream ran higher after rain, and the water from the upper reach tasted different from the lower, something mineral and clean that he had stopped being able to ignore once he noticed it. Each time he went into the forest, he went a little further. He was building a map in his mind, the way he had built maps of the village and the slave caravan route, and every place he had needed to survive by understanding its layout. It was not a skill anyone had taught him. It was what he did with attention, when attention was the only tool he had. One afternoon, he followed a deer path that bent around the north face of the mountain. He was curious about where it turned, so he followed it past the turn, and then past the next. The light shifted while he was walking. When he finally stopped and looked back, the path looked different going the other direction, and the trees here were older, denser, the kind that had been growing so long they seemed to belong to a different conversation than the younger forest below. He heard the sound before he turned, weight moving through undergrowth, deliberate, unhurried. Not an animal panicking, an animal working. He turned. The wolf was enormous, and that word does not cover it. Its shoulders came level with his waist. The fur along its spine was darker than the rest, near black, and it stood at the edge of the tree line, with its head low and its gaze fixed on him, with the particular focus of something that has already calculated the outcome and found it acceptable. He heard a second one. Behind him, off to his left, 20 meters, possibly less. He had no weapon. He had come out without one, because he had not yet gone this far before, and the thought of needing one had not seemed worth the wait. The wolf at the tree line took one slow step forward. He had 2 seconds, maybe 3. The wolf at the tree line had taken 1 step, and its weight was now shifting forward, testing his response. Behind and to his left, the second one had gone silent, which was worse than hearing it move. Quiet meant it had chosen its position. He did not run. Every instinct he had that was not about books told him running was wrong here. He grabbed the nearest thing, a fallen branch at his feet, half-rotted and unreliable, but something. He held it in front of him, made himself as large as he was, which was considerable, and he shouted. Not words, just sound, the way men do when they are frightened and have chosen not to show it in the less useful direction. The wolf at the tree line stopped. 1 breath. 2. Then it came. It crossed the distance in the time it takes to blink twice, and it hit him before he could do anything useful with the branch. The weight was enormous, like being struck by something that should not be moving that fast for how big it was. He went down, and the forest floor came up hard against his back, and the breath left him completely. He got the branch between them on pure reflex. The wolf's jaw found the branch instead of his throat, crushed through it in one movement, and then found his shoulder. The pain was a white band from the shoulder into his chest. He felt teeth through the muscle and through what was deeper than muscle. He punched with his free hand, wrong angle. The position gave him nothing useful. The wolf shook its head, and his shoulder was still in its mouth, and the world went sideways. Something moved in his chest, not fear. He had fear, but this was something underneath it, deep and pressurized, like a container that has been sealed too long, and the seal is beginning to give. Heat that had nothing to do with the animal's body pinning him. Heat that started somewhere central and moved outward. He looked at the wolf's face above his own. He wanted it to stop. The fire came from the wolf, not from his hands, not from his breath, from the animal itself. A sudden bright eruption across its chest and forelegs, as though the wolf had been made of dry material all along and had only needed a reason. The wolf released him and threw itself sideways into the undergrowth, crashing through the brush, and then going quiet. Juwan lay on the forest floor and looked at where the fire was already dying against the damp earth. The second wolf had gone still. He could hear it somewhere to his left, stationary, deciding. After a long moment, it moved. Away, not toward. He tried to sit up. His shoulder had other plans. The bite had reached bone, or close enough that the distinction did not matter. He could feel the shape of what the teeth had done without particularly wanting to. He got himself upright against the base of a tree and sat with his back against the bark and his right hand pressing hard on the wound. Blood on his palm, blood on his coat where the jaw had gone through. He was alive. He turned that fact over carefully. He was alive and one shoulder was badly damaged, and there were two large animals somewhere in this forest, and he was 40 minutes from the cabin without a working arm. He put his left hand flat on the ground and pushed himself up. He made it back. Some of the journey home stayed with him clearly, and some of it became impressionistic as the blood loss worked on the edges of things. He came up the path to the cabin door in the last of the afternoon light, and Lizzie heard him on the step and opened the door before he touched it. Her face changed. She sat him down and pulled the coat off carefully, which was not painless, and looked at the shoulder with the focused expression of someone assessing rather than reacting. She cleaned it. That was significantly more painful than the original injury. He sat still and fixed his eyes on a point on the opposite wall while she worked. Dorothy came to the doorway of the back room. She stood there watching. After a moment, she went to the water jar, filled his cup, and set it on the floor beside his foot. Then she went back to the doorway and kept watching. He drank the water. Lizzie wrapped the shoulder tight. She said whatever had done this had a jaw larger than anything she had seen bite a person before. He said it had been a wolf. She said she had seen wolf bites, and this was not the shape of one, not at this depth. He said it had been a large wolf. She looked at him with the expression she kept for moments when she had concluded he was choosing not to tell her everything, and had also concluded that pushing would not help. She asked if he was hungry. He was not, but he said yes, because she needed something she could solve, and hunger was solvable. He ate with his left hand while Dorothy fell asleep on her mat, and when the fire was low and Lizzie had gone to bed, he carefully lifted the edge of the wrapping. The wound had already started closing. Not the way a bad wound closes, slowly, armored in scar tissue over weeks. Closing the way a hand closes, purposefully, as though the body had decided this was a problem to fix now rather than later. He pressed his fingers into where the teeth had found bone. No pain, just muscle doing what muscle does. He replaced the wrapping and tied it and wore it for another 4 days so that nobody would ask why he had stopped. Gus noticed anyway. The old hunter appeared 10 days after the wolf attack, the way he apparently appeared, without announcement and without a stated reason. He walked with a slight drag in his left leg that he had clearly spent years compensating for, so efficiently that you caught it only if you were already watching for it. He had the bearing of a man who had been outdoors for most of his adult life, and had consequently lost the habit of small talk. He asked to see the shoulder. Juwan said the shoulder was fine. Gus said he had found the wolf tracks on the north face 3 days ago, and had also found the scorched patch near the old copper beaches, which was interesting, because he knew of nothing in this forest that left a burn in that shape in a damp season. He had spoken to Lizzie in the village 2 days before, who had mentioned her husband had come home with what she believed was a wolf bite and had healed faster than anything she had seen. He said all of this without inflection, the way a man lays down cards he has already decided to show. Juwan looked at him for a long moment. Then he showed him the shoulder. Gus was quiet. He pressed 2 fingers into the clean skin, the way a man confirms something he already suspects. He stood back and looked at Juwan's face with the attention of someone adding a number to a total they have been keeping for a while. He said he had been a hunter on this mountain for 30 years and had seen some things that did not fit easy categories. He said he thought twice-weekly sessions, a few hours each, and he would teach Juwan to survive up here the right way. Not the rough version. All of it. He said it as a practical proposal. He turned and walked back down the path before Juwan could ask why. The lessons were thorough. Gus taught tracking by bringing him to fresh animal sign and asking what had made it and when, letting Juwan reason through it before correcting what was wrong. He taught weather reading from cloud shape and wind angle and the way certain birds moved before a front came in. He started archery with a compound bow he produced from somewhere without explaining where. Juwan started badly, which Gus treated as the expected beginning, and improved at a pace that produced slightly longer silences between corrections, which was apparently the closest the man came to praise. The lessons spread. Gus taught trapping, hide preparation, the identification of plants useful for food and for wound care, the specific art of moving through the forest without announcing yourself to everything in it. He was building a complete picture of mountain survival with a comprehensiveness that did not match the framing of a neighbor doing a favor. Juwan noticed the comprehensiveness. He set the noticing aside in the place he kept things that did not yet have enough pieces to form a shape. He was on the lower slope with Gus one afternoon, working on a trapping line, when he heard the sound from the cabin. They both heard it at the same instant. He was already moving before either of them spoke. He came through the cabin door hard enough that it struck the wall. 3 men inside, 2 near the storage area, bundles at their feet, 1 between them and Lizzie, standing with the posture of a man who has assessed the room and liked the numbers. Red hair, broad, the blocking one. The other 2 were heavier and slower, and had the confidence of people who had prearranged their exits. Lizzie had both hands on a cooking pot. Her knuckles were pale against the clay. Dorothy was not in the room. He processed this instantly and assigned the right amount of relief to it. He moved. What followed was not a fight in the usual sense. It was a very large, very focused man removing 3 people from a space they had decided was theirs, efficiently and without much art. The red-haired man went down hard. The second one threw a punch that Juwan walked through like weather, barely registering it before addressing its source. The third made it to the doorway before being collected back inside. He had the red-haired one by the collar. The man was on his knees on the floor. A decision point had arrived. Gus spoke from behind him. He said only one thing. He said Dorothy was standing at the side window. Juwan became aware of his hand, the grip, the specific weight of the kneeling man. He became aware of the window. He let go and stepped back, and his breathing took a moment to find its normal rate. He told the 3 men to leave. He said it once, quietly. Something in the way he said it was more persuasive than anything else in the room. They left. The red-haired one left his bag on the floor without appearing to notice. Gus watched them go. He remarked, in the tone of a man thinking aloud, that people who wanted to make trouble were sometimes more useful left breathing, in case anyone came looking for them later and needed someone to point to. He picked up the abandoned bag and put it on the table. Lizzie set the cooking pot down, very carefully, and sat on the stool and put her hands flat on her thighs. Juwan went outside. Dorothy was against the cabin wall, not hiding exactly, but not advertising herself either. She looked at his face the way she looked at things she was cataloging. He sat on the ground with his back against the wall. After a moment, she sat beside him. They stayed there, watching the slope below, while Juwan's heart rate returned to something manageable. Oz found them 10 minutes later. The rabbit had apparently been under a bush during the entire episode, and emerged now with the untroubled air of an animal whose afternoon had been entirely ordinary. It settled against Dorothy's knee and allowed itself to be scratched behind its small horns. He had found Oz a week before the robbers came. The horned rabbit had been sitting at the base of a rock on the lower path, small and still in the way of an animal that cannot run, with one rear leg at a wrong angle. He had crouched beside it. The rabbit looked at him with the black bead eyes of something that has calculated its options, and decided the large human was not the most pressing problem. He thought about his own shoulder, about the warmth that moved when he reached for it. He reached out slowly. The rabbit did not pull away. When his hand made contact, he felt the familiar deep heat moving outward, and he focused it on the leg, on the wrongness of the angle. The rabbit's eyes went wide. The leg straightened. The animal sat still for 3 full seconds, apparently reviewing its updated situation, and then stood and took 2 experimental hops. He sat back and looked at his hands. Dorothy emerged from behind a nearby rock, having clearly been watching from concealment for some time, without finding it necessary to announce herself. She picked up the rabbit with both hands, tucked it against her chest, and looked at Juwan. She said it was coming home. He said they should ask Lizzie. She said she was going to ask Lizzie. She turned up the path. The rabbit was already examining her ear from close range. He stayed crouched a moment longer. The rabbit's short horn had glowed, briefly, a warm amber while he worked. He had noticed it and was filing it somewhere to examine later when he had enough of a picture to make sense of it. He followed Dorothy up the path. Oz became part of the household so completely that within 2 weeks it was difficult to remember the arrangement had ever been otherwise. The rabbit slept at the foot of Dorothy's mat and followed her at a consistent 2-foot distance across the cabin floor, a behavior that Lizzie found startling for approximately 4 days and then quietly came to rely on as an indicator of Dorothy's location. Dorothy named it with the same tone she used for settled facts. Oz. Done. Life on the mountain found its rhythm. Juwan started teaching Dorothy to read using whatever Gus brought up from the village. Traders' lists, almanac pages, a section of a law document so dense with formal language that Dorothy declared it the most boring object she had ever encountered, and then proceeded to sound out every word in it anyway, out of sheer determination. Lizzie joined the lessons without formally joining them, sitting nearby at first and then gradually closer, and he noticed she was a faster reader than she believed herself to be. He practiced with the fire at the bend in the stream, where the rocks blocked the view from the path. He had learned something that changed how he understood it. The fire did not come from him, it appeared in whatever he focused on. He had scorched bark by accident when his attention wandered. He had lit a wet pile of wood cleanly, from the inside, with no visible start. He was learning that the focusing was the skill, not the heat itself. He said nothing about any of this to anyone except Gus, who already knew what he was, and said less about it than Juwan expected, which itself told him something. A merchant came through the village on a market day in early winter. Lizzie had cut her own hair the previous week, one quiet evening, and Juwan had noticed the length gone in the morning and asked nothing because her face had been arranged in the way it became when a decision was already made. She had brought the hair to market wrapped in cloth. Hair sold in this world. The merchant unrolled the cloth, examined the quality, which was good, and offered a price that was roughly a third of what it was worth. Juwan had spent enough time in the village market and on the caravan route to know what fair looked like. He stepped forward and named the real number. The merchant explained, transport costs, uncertain conditions, the season. Juwan said those were interesting concerns. He said the price was still the real price. The merchant looked at him with the particular expression of a man running his own calculation. He looked at Lizzie. He looked back. He paid. Walking home, Lizzie was quiet in the way that sometimes preceded something she had been holding. Eventually, she said that her first husband used to step in front of whatever she was doing and correct her, about anything, for any reason. He thought about what to say. He said he had not corrected her. He had corrected the merchant's number. She had made the thing. She was entitled to what it was worth. She was quiet another long moment. Then she looked sideways at him while they walked, and her expression was one he did not fully know how to read yet. Something that was not gratitude exactly, but was something adjacent to it, and older. She walked the rest of the way without saying anything more. The following morning, both of the remaining books were already on the table when he came out, open to the first pages. The birds appeared on a morning in the middle of the month. He was on the north slope with Gus, working on the upper section of the trapping line, when he noticed them. A cluster of large dark birds, wide-winged and patient, circling a section of the mountain above the second ridge. They moved in the slow, methodical pattern of birds, waiting for something to stop moving. He watched them for a moment. He mentioned them to Gus. The old hunter looked up. He studied the birds for a long moment, his face giving nothing. He said they nested in the high crags sometimes. He said a fallen deer or a sick animal could pull them from a distance. He said it evenly, in the tone he used for explaining things he considered ordinary. He moved to the next section of the trap line without looking back at the birds again. Juwan did not push it, but he noticed the birds the next morning from the cabin path. They were in the same position, circling the same high ground. Whatever they were waiting on had not yet finished. Over the following days, he watched them during the morning hunts and during the return trips, and they did not shift their position or disperse. He said nothing about them to Lizzie. There was nothing precise enough yet to say. Only the feeling of a familiar smell in a wrong direction, the sense of a shape forming in the background of his days that he could not name, but could not stop noticing either. He kept practicing at the stream bend. He was getting faster. The fire came more cleanly each time, less pressure required, less time between the intention and the result. He was beginning to understand what he had access to, in a way that felt less like discovery, and more like remembering something he had always almost known. Gus watched him practice once, from 30 feet back, without being heard approaching. When Juwan turned, the old man was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on him before. Not surprise, something more complicated than surprise. Something that looked, from a distance, like a man looking at a solution to a problem he had been carrying for a long time. He walked away down the path without commenting. Juwan turned back to the water and held the heat steady in his hands and watched the surface below him and thought about the birds still circling above the second ridge, and about the expression on Gus's face, and about the way the two of them lived next to each other in the same thought and would not separate. Gus found the nest on a cold morning in the deep part of the month. He did not tell Juwan. He went back down to the village and spoke to the chief in private, in the chief's back room, and he told him there were goblins in the northeast quadrant of the mountain. He estimated roughly 10, which was manageable if addressed promptly. The actual number was closer to 60. He had counted the sleeping spots in the nest. He had found scattered remains of 3 sheep from the valley below the ridge, what the goblins had not consumed. He had read the pattern of their movement across 2 days and understood what was forming, because he had been reading goblin behavior on this mountain for the better part of his adult life. He knew what a horde at that size became when internal pressure built and they ran out of room. The chief hired adventurers from the town 3 hours down the road and told them there were approximately 10 goblins and priced the contract to match that estimate. He was not lying to save money. He was already thinking about something else entirely. Juwan knew none of this. What he knew was that the training sessions intensified in the second half of the month without explanation. Longer hours, more specific application. Gus had shifted from fundamentals to combat geometry, how to clear an enclosed space, how to fight with a wall committed behind you, how to use height and weight as primary weapons when distance was not available. The archery sessions changed too, moving from accuracy to speed, how fast a target could be acquired and released, not whether the shot was perfect. Juwan noticed the shift and mentioned it once. Gus said winter put pressure on the animals, and it was worth being ready. He let it stand. Gus had made his decision alone in the forest, standing at the nest's edge with the cold coming off the trees, and the smell of the place tightening something in his stomach that had not moved in years. He had been making versions of this decision since the night 22 years ago, when a raid had taken his hunting partner and left him face down with a wound that healed wrong, and had given him the dragging step he would carry until he died. He had vowed something on that ground. He had kept it imperfectly ever since, managing the mountain, culling the numbers below a threshold, never having the tool to do what actually needed doing. Now there was a man on the mountain who could pull fire out of the air, who healed from deep wounds in days, who had barely begun to understand what he was holding inside himself. He placed Juwan's family on one side of the scale, outsiders technically, the widow and the slave girl and the unnamed child, none of them with blood claims to this village, all of them placed on the mountain by the chief's convenience rather than anyone's choice. On the other side he placed the nest. The horde, the certainty of what 60 became when they ran out of options and turned outward toward the valley below. He told himself the math was clear. He built Juwan for 3 more weeks, teaching him everything he knew, and the teaching was not false. The skills were real. The preparation was genuine. What was false was only the reason. He was on the lower slope checking the trap line the morning the attack came. The birds had been circling the high ground all month, and he had stopped counting the days of it. Then they scattered. Not a gradual drift, not the slow dispersal of birds that have lost interest. A sudden, startled break, the whole cluster fragmenting at once. He left the line where it lay. He was running before he finished deciding to run, moving uphill at a pace the slope objected to, and he overruled. Somewhere above him, a sound cut through the trees, high and brief, a sound that did not belong to an animal. He ran harder. The cabin appeared through the upper tree line, and the first thing he saw was Dorothy standing at the gate, both hands on the fence rail. Her face was turned toward the east path, and her expression was very still and very concentrated. He had time to take in that stillness before he saw what she was looking at. The first goblin came around the east corner of the cabin, waist height, broad, moving with the shuffling confidence of something that had done this before. Two more followed it. Movement in the trees to the north said there were further ones he could not yet see. Dorothy did not move from the gate. He crossed the remaining ground and put himself between her and the path, and the goblin closest to him stopped. He could see it recalculating. Whatever it had expected at this cabin, he was not part of the estimate. He hit it, and the fire came without effort, cleaner than it had ever come, nothing like the panicked eruption from the wolf fight. This was practiced fire, aimed fire, the product of weeks at the stream bend. The goblin went backward into the two behind it. The ones from the north came around the corner and saw the light. What followed was not a clean engagement. It was a large man defending a narrow approach in front of his gate, using fire that came when he directed it, and a blade he had taken from the first one down, and his own body as a wall that the approach forced them to address before anything else. He took cuts. One across the forearm where a blade came from a direction he had committed away from. One at his hip, where a second found the gap between his elbow and his side. He registered both and kept moving. Lizzie came out the cabin door with a spear held at the right angle, drove two toward the tree line at the east corner, and held the angle. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had decided that feelings could wait. At some point, Oz appeared on the fence rail. The rabbit sat with its small horn raised, the amber glow steady, and the goblins nearest to it moved sideways without being touched. He registered that and set it aside. 12. By rough count, before it ended. Several fled when the numbers changed in the wrong direction. He let those go. 3 came back around for another pass, and he did not extend that option to them. Then the trees were quiet. He stood at the gate. His hands were shaking, and he made fists until they stopped. Lizzie lowered the spear to the ground and put one hand against the cabin wall and breathed. Dorothy was still at the fence rail, watching the tree line with the patient inventory expression she used when she was cataloging something she did not yet have a category for. He looked at his family in the doorway of his house. He understood what the goblins had come for. The approach had been on the east side, Lizzie's window. The one at the gate had not oriented on Juwan until he appeared between them. He knew what the goblins did when a horde grew, and pressure built, and satisfaction was not possible from within. He knew what they came for from human settlements. They had come for his wife. He sat with that knowledge while Lizzie went inside, and Dorothy settled on her mat, with Oz pressed against her chest. The afternoon moved around him. The trees stood where they had always stood. He went inside and told Lizzie they needed to leave. He said it plainly, without softening it into an option. He looked at her across the cabin, and she looked back, and he watched her calculate what little she was being asked to leave behind and what large things she was being asked to trust. She got up and began packing without a word. The village had not quite decided to panic yet, but it was preparing the ground for it. Word had come down the mountain ahead of them, carried by farmers who had seen the signs or heard things in the night that did not sound like wind. 2 families were already loaded and moving. A third was in an argument about what mattered enough to take. The square near the well had the sideways, compressed energy of a place in the last minutes before something breaks one direction or the other. The adventurers hired by the chief were at the center of their own confrontation. They had gone north expecting 10 goblins and had found the actual number, and they were back now with the specific energy of men who intended to discuss the discrepancy with whoever had provided the original estimate. Juwan moved through the square. He was not looking for the chief. He was looking for transport. A merchant's heavy cart was being loaded near the east gate, the driver being negotiated at simultaneously by 4 different families, each making a case for urgency. Juwan did not negotiate. He came to the cart with Lizzie and Dorothy behind him, and put his hand on the side rail, and looked at the driver, and said his family was on the cart. The driver began an objection. Juwan waited. They were on the cart. He caught the chief once, across the square, talking to the adventurers with the body language of a man carefully distributing blame in directions other than himself. The chief glanced across the square, and their eyes met, and the man's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something working hard to resemble calm. Juwan had been building a picture. A chief who bought a foreign slave with no explanation and then assigned him to the mountain. A chief who had known, or suspected, what Juwan was, and who had never asked him about his magic directly, and who had looked at him in the village square with the specific attention of a man considering the resale value of something he did not legally own. A chief who had spoken to Gus in private and who had hired adventurers with a number that was wrong by a factor that could not be accidental. He filed the picture away. The cart was moving. Dorothy settled in the back with Oz on her lap. Lizzie put her hand over the girls and kept it there. The village gate passed behind them, and the road opened ahead, the main track down toward the valley, wide and straight between the tree lines. He should have felt the weight lift. The cart was moving. His family was in it. The mountain was behind them, and the road was ahead, and they were free of the chief's square and the burning smell of the slope. He did not feel relief. He felt the way you feel when a sound stops in the middle of the night, and the silence it leaves behind is louder than the noise was. He watched the tree line moving past on both sides of the road. He watched the sky. He watched the road ahead. Dorothy was quiet. Oz pressed tight to her chest, his small horn catching the afternoon light. Lizzie sat with her hand still over Dorothy's and her eyes forward, doing what she did with difficult things, processing them later. The road curved around a long stand of old trees and came out straight again. Gus was standing in the center of it, 30 meters ahead, standing the way a man stands when he has decided to stop and has no intention of being moved. His hands at his sides, his weight settled, not urgent, not apologetic. He was looking at the cart the way a man looks at the last item on a list he has been working through for a long time. The driver pulled the cart to a stop. From behind them on the road came a sound that was not the village. Not feet, not carts, not people in organized flight. Something lower and more numerous, the sound of a large number of bodies moving through undergrowth on both sides of the track, converging. Juwan stood up and turned. The goblins came out of the tree line onto the road, in a mass too large to count in one look. Dozens. Far more than had come to the cabin. More than any number Gus had given anyone. They spread across the road and into the verges on both sides, unhurried, because the road ahead was blocked, and the road behind was now theirs. He turned back to Gus. The old man was moving away. Not running, not retreating. Walking. The deliberate walk of a man whose work in a place has concluded. He angled to the side of the road, and his direction was not toward the goblins and not toward the cart. His direction was away from all of it. The pieces arranged themselves without asking Juwan's permission. The training, the comprehensive, unhurried, complete transfer of everything Gus knew, which was not the generosity of a neighbor, but the preparation of a weapon being aimed at a specific target. The birds on the upper ridge, and the flat dismissal. 10 goblins. A number spoken to the chief in a private room, passed to adventurers on a contract, never corrected. The chief's careful attention in the village square, and the specific quality of how he had looked at Juwan the day he bought him. The look of a man pricing something he intended to move at profit. They had known each other, Gus and the chief. They had looked at the man on the mountain with 2 rare affinities and a family of outsiders, and they had made their separate calculations. The chief wanted to sell him. Gus wanted to aim him. Both of them had needed him to stay on the mountain long enough to be useful, and both had needed his family to stay with him, because Juwan without his family would not have stayed. The goblins behind them were 25 meters back and closing at a walk. Dorothy was watching Gus's retreating back. Juwan had named her after a girl who landed somewhere strange, by forces she had not chosen, and fought through everything that came at her on the way back to where she was supposed to be. He had told her the name meant she would find it. He stepped down from the cart. He turned to face the road behind them, the mass of bodies spreading across it, and the heat in his chest was already moving, deep and steady, nothing like the first desperate fire that had come for the wolf. That had been an accident of survival. This was something that had been built over weeks of mornings at the stream bend, practiced to a point, aimed now at something real. He heard Lizzie step down behind him. He heard the scrape of the spear shaft against the cart's side rail. He did not look back at her. He knew what he would see. The road was quiet for one more second. Then it was not.